The first thing I heard was not a cry, not a roar, but a sound that was somehow worse. It was a guttural, wounded kind of noise, a sound of pure agony that scraped against the quiet morning air. I stopped dead on the trail. My boots, heavy with mud, made no further sound as I stood there, listening. The forest around me was waking up, a gentle symphony of chirping birds and the rustle of leaves, but that one awful sound cut through it all. It was coming from the cliffs, the jagged, unforgiving rock face that rose up beside the path, a place I usually avoided. I was a man who preferred the ground to the sky, and certainly the quiet company of trees to the silent, judging stare of stone. My name is Sam, and a few weeks ago, I wouldn't have given this a second thought. I would have told myself it was just some animal, a part of nature's brutal design, and I would have kept walking. But something was different now. The solitude of the last few months had a way of stripping away a person's defenses, of making you raw and open to the world. I had been walking these trails to escape, to outrun a grief that was heavier than any pack I could carry. But that sound, that plea for help, it felt personal. It felt like it was calling to me. I moved closer to the cliff face, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. The sound came again, weaker this time, a pained whimper. I scrambled over some loose rocks, pushing aside thorny bushes until I reached a small clearing at the base of the cliffs. And there, on a narrow ledge about 20 feet up, was a lynx. She was not moving. Her body was twisted at an unnatural angle, one of her hind legs bent in a way that made my stomach clench. Her beautiful spotted coat was dusty and matted in places, and a dark stain was spreading on the rock beneath her. But it was her eyes that held me. They were a bright, piercing amber, full of a pain so profound it seemed to pull the air from my lungs. She wasn't looking at the sky, or the trees, or even the endless valley below. She was looking right at me, and in those eyes, I saw something I never expected to see in a wild animal. She was begging, not for mercy from some unseen predator, but for help from me, a human, a creature she should have feared. The moment stretched into an eternity. The world around me disappeared. There was only me, the lynx, and the impossible distance between us. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I left her here, she would die. The sun was getting higher, and the heat would soon be unbearable. The vultures, I was sure, would be circling. I had to do something. I had to. I ran back home, my mind a whirlwind of panicked thoughts. I live in a small cabin, a place I had built myself, deep in the woods. My house was a mess, a monument to my recent state of mind. But I ignored the clutter and went straight for the shed. I grabbed a coil of thick rope, some carabiners, a heavy-duty harness, and a first aid kit I hadn't opened in years. My hands were shaking as I packed everything into a rucksack. My dog, a scruffy, loyal mutt named Buster, watched me with a worried look in his eyes. He must have sensed my urgency. I gave him a quick pat on the head and a promise that I'd be back soon. The walk back to the cliffs was a blur. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a plan. The ledge was too high to jump to, and too sheer to climb without proper gear. I was a decent climber, but I hadn't done anything like this in years. My body was sore from a life of hard work, not from scaling rock faces. But the memory of those pleading amber eyes drove me on. When I got back, the lynx was still there, but her head was now resting on the rock, her breathing shallow and ragged. She still watched me, but the light in her eyes was starting to dim. I knew I had to be fast. I found a sturdy tree 20 feet above the ledge and carefully secured one end of the rope around its trunk, testing the knot with all my weight. I then put on the harness, checked all the clips, and began to rappel down. The descent was terrifying. The rock was slick with morning dew, and my old boots kept slipping on the tiny footholds. My hands, calloused as they were, burned as the rope slid through them. I could feel the old muscles in my back and shoulders screaming in protest. But all I could think about was the lynx below me. I had to get to her. Finally, I was on the ledge. The lynx flinched as my boots hit the stone, but she didn't try to get up. She was too weak. She just watched me, a flicker of fear and a whole lot of resignation in her eyes. I slowly, carefully, got down on one knee. "Hey there, beautiful," I said softly, my voice hoarse. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She let out another pained whimper and tried to pull her injured leg away from me. I saw it then, a compound fracture. The bone was piercing through her skin. My heart sank. This was worse than I thought. A wild animal with an injury like this, a predator who relied on speed and agility to survive, had a slim chance. A very slim chance. I opened the first aid kit, pulling out a makeshift splint I had fashioned from a small branch and some medical tape. I had no illusions that I was a veterinarian, but I had to do something. I had to stop the bleeding and stabilize the leg. I worked slowly, talking to her the entire time, my voice a constant, soothing hum. I told her about my life, about Buster, about the grief that had led me to this path. It was a bizarre, one-sided conversation, but it seemed to work. She started to relax, her tense muscles slowly giving way to a weary trust. After what felt like an hour, I had the splint in place and the wound cleaned and bandaged as best as I could. She was still in a lot of pain, but the bleeding had stopped. Now came the hard part, getting her off the ledge. I looked up at the rope, then down at her fragile, injured body. I knew I couldn't just carry her up. She was too heavy, and the climb was too dangerous. I needed help, real help, and that meant I had to go against every instinct I had developed over the last few months. I had to talk to someone. I had to let people in. I climbed back up the rope, my muscles screaming with every pull. The moment I was back on solid ground, I didn't even stop to catch my breath. I ran down the path, not back to my cabin, but to the road. I knew the local sheriff, a man named James, lived not far from here. I had seen his truck parked outside his house a few times. He was a good man, from what little I knew, but he was also a man of rules and regulations. I knew this was going to be a tough sell. I found his house a few minutes later, a modest two-story home with a neat lawn. I pounded on his door, not even giving him a chance to wake up properly. He opened the door, a look of confusion on his face. "Sam," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on? It's barely sunrise." "James, I need your help," I said, my voice breathless. "There's a lynx, a beautiful lynx. She's fallen from the cliffs. Her leg is broken. She's going to die if we don't get her out of there. I need help. I need a veterinarian. We need more people." James just stared at me for a long moment. He was a big man, with a kind, weathered face, but right now, his face was a mask of disbelief. "A lynx, Sam? A wild animal?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "You know it's illegal to interfere with wildlife like that. The State Wildlife Service handles things like this." My heart sank. This was exactly what I had feared. The rules, the bureaucracy, the cold, unfeeling machinery of the system. "James, listen to me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She's not just a wild animal. She's lying there, hurt and scared." She looked at me. She asked for my help. "I can't just leave her. I've already done what I can. I splinted her leg, but I can't get her off the ledge by myself. I'm telling you, she's going to die." The look on his face shifted. He saw the desperation in my eyes, the raw honesty of my plea. He knew me, even if he didn't know me well. He knew I wasn't the kind of person to make things up. "Okay, Sam," he said finally, his voice full of a new resolve. "Tell me exactly where she is, and let me make a few calls. This isn't going to be easy." He called the local veterinary clinic, the State Wildlife Service, and a couple of his deputies. He explained the situation, and to my surprise, he was a lot more persuasive than I would have been. The woman from the Wildlife Service, a stern-sounding woman named Jessica, was hesitant at first, but after hearing the details from James, she agreed to send a team. She was an expert in these things, a woman who worked with animals every day. She understood the bond one was talking about, even if she didn't say it. An hour later, there was a small crowd at the base of the cliffs. James and his two deputies, a vet named Dr. Miller, and Jessica from the Wildlife Service. They were all looking at me, then at the cliff face, their faces a mixture of professional skepticism and genuine concern. Dr. Miller, a kind-faced man with gentle eyes, approached me. "Sam, I appreciate what you've done. I really do. But we have to be careful. A wounded lynx is a dangerous animal. It's a predator. She could turn on us at any moment." "She won't," I said, my voice firm. "She trusts me. She's in too much pain to fight. She just needs our help." Jessica, the wildlife officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a gaze that seemed to miss nothing, came over to me. "What kind of first aid did you give her?" she asked, her voice clipped and efficient. I explained what I had done. She listened intently, then nodded slowly. "It was a good move," she admitted. "It's not what we would have done, but in an emergency situation, it was the best you could do. Now here's the plan. My team has more experience with this. We'll set up a system to lower a special carrier down to the ledge. We'll sedate her and put her in it, then we'll lift her up. You can't be a part of the rescue, Sam. It's too dangerous." My heart sank again. I had been there for her. I had risked my neck. But she was right. They were the professionals. This was their job. I had to let them do it. I just hoped she was okay. The next hour was a flurry of activity. The wildlife team, an impressive group of 5 people, set up a complex system of ropes and pulleys. They lowered a specially designed animal carrier, a kind of small stretcher, down to the ledge. One of the officers rappelled down, moving with a practiced grace that made my earlier attempt look clumsy and pathetic. He had a blowgun with him, and a small, quick dart found its mark on the lynx's flank. I watched with bated breath. The lynx let out a sharp cry, then went limp. The officer worked quickly, carefully placing her on the stretcher. He secured her, then gave a signal. The team at the top began to pull, the ropes straining under the weight. Slowly, painstakingly, the stretcher with the lynx inside rose up the cliff face. When she was finally on the ground, Dr. Miller and Jessica rushed to her side. They examined her, their voices a low murmur of medical terms I didn't understand. They gave her another injection, this one a painkiller, and then they carefully loaded her into a special cage in the back of one of their trucks. "She's in shock," Dr. Miller said, looking up at me. "But we'll get her to the clinic. It's not a guarantee, Sam, but we'll do everything we can." I just nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to ask if I could go with them, but I knew the answer. This wasn't my world. I was just a man who had found a hurt animal. The next few days were a blur of worry and sleepless nights. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the sound of her cry, the look in her eyes. I had no idea if she was even alive. I tried calling the number on the wildlife officer's card, but it just rang busy. I felt a crushing sense of helplessness. I had done my part, and now it was out of my hands. It was an awful feeling, a feeling I was far too familiar with. 3 days later, I got a call. It was Dr. Miller. "Sam," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I have good news. The surgery was a success. The fracture was bad, but we were able to repair it. She's a fighter. She's a little groggy, but she's going to be okay." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I sat down on a log, my head in my hands, a shaky, exhausted laugh escaping my lips. Can I see her?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, Sam, that's not really how this works. We have to limit human contact with wild animals." "But," he trailed off, "Jessica mentioned you're the one who found her. She said the lynx seemed calmer around you. It's a risk, but maybe it's worth it. We need her to trust us. Come on down tomorrow morning. We'll be at the clinic in the city, the one on Elm Street. We'll see what happens." The next morning, I drove to the city, a place I had avoided for months. The clinic was a small, unassuming building, but inside, it was a hub of activity. The smell of antiseptic and animal fur filled the air. Dr. Miller met me at the front desk and led me to a small, private room. And there she was. She was lying in a large cage, a thick bandage wrapped around her leg. She was thin, her ribs visible beneath her coat, but her eyes, those beautiful amber eyes, were bright and alert. She looked at me, and for a long moment, there was no sound but the gentle hum of the ventilation system. Then, she slowly, carefully, pushed herself up on her forelegs. I knelt down beside the cage, and my heart just about broke. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, my hand resting gently on the cage wire. She didn't growl. She didn't hiss. She just looked at me, a silent, profound understanding passing between us. It was a kind of thank you that was more powerful than any words could ever be. For the next few weeks, I visited her every day. I brought her treats, a special kind of meat the vet had approved. I talked to her, my voice a soft murmur in the quiet room. She got stronger every day. The look of fear and pain in her eyes was replaced with a new light, a glimmer of life returning. One day, she was finally able to stand on all 4 legs, her injured one still a little wobbly, but strong. She walked to the front of her cage and rubbed her head against the bars, a soft, purring sound rumbling in her chest. It was a sound of contentment, a sound of healing. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Jessica came in one afternoon, a serious look on her face. "Sam, she's ready," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. She's fully recovered. We've done everything we can. It's time for her to go back to the wild. It's where she belongs." I just nodded, my throat tight with a mix of joy and a deep, unexpected sorrow. I knew this day was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. I had gotten attached to her. She had become my purpose, my reason to get out of bed in the morning. And now, I had to let her go. The next day, we drove her back to the mountains. The same mountains where I had found her. It was me, Dr. Miller, and Jessica. We drove a bit further, to a remote part of the range where she would have the best chance of survival. We parked the truck in a small clearing, and I helped Jessica and Dr. Miller carry her cage to a spot near a stream. I opened the cage door. The lynx, my lynx, looked at me for a long moment. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a kind of hesitation, as if she didn't want to leave. My heart ached, a sharp, physical pain. "Go on," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "You're free now. Go home." She looked at me one last time, a silent promise in her eyes. Then, with a graceful leap, she was out of the cage and gone into the woods. We watched her go, a ghost of spotted fur and a flash of a beautiful amber eye. I stood there for a long time, the empty cage in front of me, a hole in my heart. Months passed. My life slowly began to return to a new kind of normal. The grief was still there, a quiet companion, but it was no longer the all-consuming monster it once was. I started to go on longer hikes, not to escape, but to just be there, to be a part of the world. One evening, as the sun was setting, I was walking along the same trail where I had found her. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. I heard a sound, a rustle in the bushes ahead of me. I froze, my heart pounding. Then, she emerged. She was in her full glory, a strong, vibrant creature, her coat a mosaic of gold and black. She was healthy, her limp gone, her movements fluid and sure. She wasn't carrying a cub, she was a lone hunter, a queen of the forest. She stopped and looked at me, those same amber eyes meeting mine. She was far enough away that there was no danger, just a profound sense of connection. She didn't growl. She didn't run. She just stood there for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement, a shared memory between us. Then, she turned, and with a flick of her tail, she disappeared into the trees. She was free. She was home. And so, in a way, was I. I learned that day that sometimes, the greatest help you can give someone is not to keep them safe in your world, but to give them the freedom to live in their own. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking lesson, and one that changed my life forever. Months passed. My life slowly began to return to a new kind of normal. The grief was still there, a quiet companion, but it was no longer the all-consuming monster it once was. I started to go on longer hikes, not to escape, but to just be there, to be a part of the world. The old, painful memories were still with me, but they were now mixed with the vibrant, hopeful memory of a fierce creature with amber eyes and an unbreakable will to live. One evening, as the sun was setting, I was walking along the same trail where I had found her. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. I heard a sound, a rustle in the bushes ahead of me. I froze, my heart pounding. Then, she emerged. She was in her full glory, a strong, vibrant creature, her coat a mosaic of gold and black. She was healthy, her limp gone, her movements fluid and sure. She wasn't carrying a cub, she was a lone hunter, a queen of the forest. She stopped and looked at me, those same amber eyes meeting mine. She was far enough away that there was no danger, just a profound sense of connection. She didn't growl. She didn't run. She just stood there for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement, a shared memory between us. Then, she turned, and with a flick of her tail, she disappeared into the trees. She was free. She was home. And so, in a way, was I. I learned that day that sometimes, the greatest help you can give someone is not to keep them safe in your world, but to give them the freedom to live in their own. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking lesson, and one that changed my life forever. I had come to the mountains to lose myself, to let the wildness of the landscape mirror the chaos in my soul. But instead, I found something. A reason to care, a reason to fight. I found a part of myself I thought was gone forever. The last time I saw her, it wasn't on the trail. It was about a year after she was released. I was hiking deep in the woods, a part of the forest I rarely ventured into. I saw two lynx kits, tiny, fluffy balls of fur, playing in a sun-dappled clearing. They were clumsy and playful, and my heart swelled at the sight. They were so full of life, so completely untroubled. I kept my distance, hiding behind a thick bush, just watching. A few moments later, a full-grown lynx emerged from the trees, her posture regal and watchful. It was her. I knew it instantly. The distinctive pattern of her spots, the intelligent intensity of her eyes. She let out a soft sound, a low purr, and the two kits ran to her, rubbing against her legs. She was a mother now. She had survived. She had not only survived, but thrived. She had built a new life. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling of deep, quiet joy. I had been a small part of that story, a single chapter in a long, beautiful book. I had given her a second chance, and in doing so, she had given me one, too. I had learned to let go, to embrace the quiet beauty of the world, and to find hope in the most unexpected places. My grief was no longer a wound that bled, but a scar that reminded me of my own resilience. The memory of her, the memory of that day on the cliff, would always be a part of me. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, there is always a chance for a new beginning.